Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. India and Germany signed multiple pacts on joint declarations of intent and exchanged agreements after bilateral talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and German Chancellor Angela Merkel in New Delhi on Friday. The agreements were inked for cooperation in fields such as space, civil aviation, maritime technology, artificial intelligence, digital technology, medicine, defense, cybersecurity and education. The Prime Minister said the expertise of economic powerhouses like Germany could help in his government's aim to build a new India by 2022. He invited Germany to also take advantage of opportunities in defense production in dedicated corridors in Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. Germany is India's largest trading partner in Europe and more than 1,700 German companies operate in the country. Merkel said that she was accompanied by a big German business delegation, including small and medium enterprises who wanted to engage in business with India. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the state of bilateral ties between India and Germany. Joining me on the program today are Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, Center for European Studies, JNU, Pramit Pal Chowdhury, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times, and Meera Shankar, former ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. What were the key highlights and the takeaways of the ongoing visit of the German Chancellor to India?
Well, firstly, I think within Germany, there's a conscious desire to expand their options in Asia and not to focus so exclusively on China. There's a discussion in the German parliament before this where they all resolved that they needed to pay more attention to developing their ties with India. So that is one thing. We have an Indo-German strategic partnership, an India-EU strategic partnership as well, which has been, where there are discussions on a very wide range of issues. And Germany is the largest trading partner in Europe for India, and the second largest research partner worldwide for India after the US. So today what we are seeing is a conscious desire to look at matching, high technology areas between the two countries. And in many areas of policy, such as cyber security, data protection, data localization, if you will, there are many similarities of approach in our policy. So as these issues become increasingly more important throughout the world, I think India and Germany can fruitfully collaborate, not just on the technical aspects, but also on policy aspects, because we also can learn from some of the European example in these areas. Clearly, in areas such as e-mobility, fuel cell technology, and so on, medicines, biochemicals, there are many areas where Germany has really been at the forefront. Where they haven't been so much at the forefront is in the area of information technology, and this is an area where partnership with India, and you see SAP, which is their largest IT company, has offices in India, in Chennai, for quite some time, and it's been a fruitful collaboration. So in many of these areas, I think India and Germany could benefit mutually from cooperating. Okay,
all right. So, Pramit, since we're here, are there any specific areas that Germany would like to concentrate on when they look at India?
Well, I think the Germans, like a lot of the continental European countries, recognize that India in a Brexit situation has traditionally tended to see Britain as its main gateway politically and to some degree in investment terms to all of Europe. Obviously, with Brexit approaching or seeming to approach, India needs to be looking for options in terms of having a major political partner in Europe. Germany, France, definitely are the two obvious countries to be working with, and that's one of the areas Germany would like to see India consider themselves as the obvious partner. India is looking at other countries too. You saw the foreign minister visit the Visegrad countries in Eastern Europe. Modi has had a Nordic summit. But Germany and France are the two obvious candidates for that role. So I think one of the things will be to see whether that is actually possible. One of Germany's key weaknesses is that it is not much of a military power. It sees itself as they call themselves a civilian power, and they have a very poor military record in the present day, and they have they have zero military presence in the Indian Ocean or in Asia, unlike, let's say, France. The other thing that Germany, as has been mentioned, Germany is, along with China, one of the two biggest exporting machines in the world. I mean, they're really a trade-based, their source of revenue is the fact that they trade and export far beyond the size of their economy. And they're very increasingly nervous. The WTO is almost on the verge of collapse. By the end of this year, its tribunal system will shut down. The international trading system is falling apart as the Americans and the Chinese go to battle with each other. And the Germans have been very worried about to maintain that trading system is absolutely crucial to their own economic future. And it's one of the areas they know India is also increasingly worried about the WTO. So they've been trying to coordinate policies on that front. And finally, the other element of the military side is that the other element to trade is maritime security. And there they are concerned at the rise of China and the decline of the United States. Until now, it has been the American Navy that has patrolled the world's seas and kept them effectively free for international trade. And a number of senior German officials who have come to India over the past 2 or 3 years have mentioned that the desire for India to become a maritime presence in the Indian Ocean and cooperate potentially with the rest of Europe and other countries is there. The Germans have talked about this idea of middle power cooperation, that if China and America are proving to be difficult, then can the Japans, Indias, Germanys, Frances of the world work together and try to fill in the gaps that are being created by the two superpowers.
Correct. Professor, because of the reasons just raised by Pramit, the reasons of trade, looking at how certain nations have become more protectionist, spoke about the WTO and how it's on the verge of collapsing. So is Germany now looking for strong partners, allies whom they can do business with?
Absolutely, because if you look at Germany, due to their own difficult past, they do not try to kind of operate as a standalone power. So what they do is they operate within the EU and also within NATO. And obviously, if you are looking at German foreign policy, they very much closely, within the EU, Franco-German alliance, and also very close security as well as economic partnership, transatlantic partnership. That has been tradition. But now, particularly the way uncertainty at the WTO, world trade, and also with the Trump policies, and even in the last 10 years or so, I think Germans have been very seriously looking at BRICS countries, much more than actually we consider BRICS as a serious bloc. And within those countries, obviously China was a big country, they had a lot of attraction towards China. To some extent that attraction even continues even today. But the way China has behaved in the last few years and the way there is certain kind of unease with the BRI projects within Europe. So there is a bit of disappointment, I would say, with China, or less attraction now towards China. With Russia, because of after Ukrainian crisis, now many of the linkages or many of the institutional linkages with EU has kind of more or less frozen. They are still trying, Germany trying kind of selective engagements with Russia. So that's again a bit of a problematic now. So they have also, they are very seriously looking towards India for major engagements. Now, the problem with this engagement has been, if I look at today, one is that today when she is traveling to India, both Indian and German economies are slowing down. Look at different industries. Car industry is in trouble both in Germany and also in India. And the major, thing which they were expecting from India, it was that, in the last 5 years, they were hoping that India would be able to deliver FTA with the EU. Now that hasn't happened. Now with these kind of difficult conditions, I mean, they have all, still the attraction is there of India because, you know, important partner, a lot of technology, a lot of areas where there is a convergence, things are happening. So they have very, I would say in a very subtle way, now they are not talking too much about FTA because they know that it's not going to happen in a hurry. So they are start focusing more on, you can say, sustainable development, renewable energies, you know, mobilities, and those are the kind of issues, and you know, many other, all 16, 17, 18, what the agreements which have been signed. So there are all areas which we can work together with them, but there is much more potential which could have been tapped actually with Germany, which we have not been able to do it because in the last 5 years we haven't signed any major FTA with any country. This was major actually, I would say, complaint from German side in the last 2-3 years that they were really hoping that this is going to happen.
Right.
But still, in fact, they are major important trading partner, investment partners. So in many areas they are working with us, and you know, those areas will continue. But I think one more area which perhaps I think we need to focus more. There is some kind of MOU which we have signed now with Germany, but still it's not an agreement. This is on the mobility agreement. Now, you know, we haven't really looked very carefully. You know, still. Even if there is a bit of a slowdown in Germany, the unemployment rate is one of the lowest in Europe, you know, close to 3% in Germany. And in the next 10 to 15 years, they will be looking about 80 to 90% jobs which are going to be created in Germany will be in the medium to high kind of skill sector.
Right.
And they are looking for a lot of, you know, skilled manpower from outside, and India can definitely fill this gap.
Sure.
And even if you look at you know, this blue card scheme which EU started, you know, a couple of years back, Germany is the only country which they have actually implemented seriously. In fact, 85% of all the blue cards which have been issued, they have been issued by Germany. And out of all those 85%, you know, cards which have been issued, you know, more than 20, I think 20 to 25% cards have been issued to just only Indian and mainly in the IT industry. Right. So there are many areas where these kind of things can be facilitated with these, you know, linkages. But of course, they would also be looking for much more mobility and those kind of agreements in which they would like to discourage the kind of politics what we have in Europe, irregular migration to Europe, but at the same time they would like to attract more and more legal ways of you know, migrating to, I mean, attracting migration, particularly in the skill areas.
Okay, all right. This issue of FTA with the EU, I'll come back to you, Pramit, on that in just a bit. But before that, Ambassador, so are there any, you know, areas that need special attention as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned, maybe a little bit of ironing out?
I don't think there were any major issues between India and Germany. I think the real question was, you know, how much substance both sides could impart to the relationship, because without substance, then, you know, attention tends to flag.
Right.
And I think the other was that within Europe, a lot of the policy was focused on what I would call internal navel gazing because of their problems with Brexit, because of the aftermath of the financial crisis, where Germany had to bail out many of the southern economies and so on. So the crises within Europe, you know, commandeered a lot of the energy and attention within Germany. Today, as the world has become far more fluid, where the Germans see, you know, competition sharpening, both in the economic and strategic realm between the US, China, and Russia, and more so as they see the US become a less reliable partner for Europe, with economic tensions between US and the Europe also spilling over, and sometimes, you know, doubts about, you know, doubts even cast about NATO by the US leadership. I think the Germans are looking really to create, you know, to look for what I would call stabilizing, you know, middle powers who could together, you know, try to do something. and a lot of their focus with India has been on two aspects as well. One is on climate change, where they think that India becomes an indispensable partner in terms of the ability of the world to meet the challenge of climate change. So a lot of their cooperation and aid, because they are the second largest aid donor to India after Japan, has been focused essentially on climate change, energy efficiency, energy access, renewable energy, urban cities, examining the resilience of urban infrastructure to climate change and what could be done in terms of adaptation and mitigation there. So a lot of their efforts have been focused on climate change and renewables and so on, this whole rubric. The other has been, education, where, as mentioned earlier, there is a skills shortage in Germany. For every, engineer that retires, I think they are not able to get another engineer to fill the place. In fact, at one stage, if I recall, it was for every 11 engineers who retired, they were able to get one as a substitute. So clearly, in this sector, they are looking for skilled people, and at the same time, they would like to do this in a manner where it doesn't become a political hot potato within the German polity, as happened with the Syrian refugees. So there are now 20,000 students, Indian students, in Germany, and many are postgraduates with a technical background. Germany itself has had a technological partnership with IIT Chennai.
Right.
And they have been looking to expand this. For instance, when I was there, I think the vice president of research for one of their major car companies was an Indian from IIT Chennai. It was also interesting to see the differences that the Germans observed in the education, because they said the Indians have a lot of theoretical knowledge,
right,
but they are very poor in terms of hands-on application.
Absolutely.
So I think they really do look to India for partnerships in education and in these areas of digitization, cybersecurity, aerospace, e-mobility, I think maritime technology, space technology. There are areas where we can work together.
Right, sure. All right. So, Pramit, coming back to this issue of the FTA with EU, what's the status currently? Because, of course, there is the whole French wine issue, there's a German car issue, and we want goods and services both to be included. So, where does it stand right now?
I would say it stands in a very deep and cold storage area. And I don't see it likely to be revived in any near time. As has been mentioned in the past 5 years, one element of the Modi government's policies has been not to do any FTAs at all. There was a view, correctly or rightly or wrongly, that FTAs are fundamentally bad for the Indian economy, and definitely did not go in line with the right-wing economic nationalism of organizations like the RSS. Now, in Modi in his second term, has begun to relook at the trade policy overall. Looks like we may be signing RCEP, for example, with Southeast Asia, and there's talk of reviving our FTA talks with Australia and some other countries. And I think the conclusion is that we've actually lost a bit of economic growth because of the fact that we've lost a lot of our export markets to Bangladesh and so on. But the EU, which is our biggest trading partner, should logically be one of the first places we do an FTA. But as you've mentioned, the number of the demands made by the Europeans, for example, at a time when everywhere is trying to move to electrical vehicles, does it make sense to allow big German gas guzzlers to be allowed into the country, is questionable. And as you've mentioned, on the other hand, anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe has become so strong, they don't feel they can concede Mode 4 services to India. So there's a sort of jam there, and on top of that, I think India has been slowly allowing the bilateral investment treaties with European countries to slowly lapse one by one. So therefore, if you go back to the FTA, and I don't think either side expects us to be looking at that closely for a while, it would come out to be a much smaller package agreement, and potentially where investment policies are at the heart of it rather than almost anything else. But in the meantime, as has been mentioned, the Germans in particular have said that, okay, look, we need help on that. The Americans have pulled out of the Paris climate change agreement. We need help on holding up a lot of other elements of that contribute to our economy, such as the WTO. So therefore, let's focus on those areas. And I think this is also reflected in the recent EU strategy paper on India, where they downplayed or downgraded the importance of the FTA, which had otherwise been the dominant focus of the European Union's policy. So along that, the Germans and the French and everybody had said, okay, let's put aside the trade for the time being, and let's focus on other areas which have been created by the problems we face now with the United States and China.
All right. And, Professor, taking the discussion forward, this in all likelihood is going to be the last term of Chancellor Angela Merkel. Is that in any way playing on the minds of both the leaders, and is that in any way going to, have an impact or any implications on the ties between the two countries?
Well, I mean, countries' ties do not really totally determined by individuals, but yes, definitely the position in which Chancellor Merkel is today, it's much weaker than what it was 2 years ago. At that point of time, the major crisis what you had, whether it was debt crisis or refugee crisis, I mean, she emerged as the strongest leader within Europe. Now, what has really happened today now, she is much weaker domestically because she has lost many elections. She has already declared that she is not going to contest next chancellor. So already leadership has been passed on to another person. And with Brexit happening, even the political power within EU is moving more towards France. And President Macron has already laid out a very ambitious plan of all the reforms agenda within the European Union. So yes, I mean, and German economy is slowing down, because even when the crisis was there within Europe or Eurozone broadly, German economy was doing very well. So by all means, in that sense, Germany economically as well as also politically is not in a position what it was say 2-3 years ago. But that does not really mean that our relations in any way would be determined only by this factor, because politics can give certain major push to certain policies, but and Germans are anyway very methodical, so those things actually work in a very, very systematic manner. But just coming one point on this FTA, now if the policymakers in India have kind of seems to decided towards signing RCEP, I don't see, I mean, there is no reason why you can't sign FTA with the European Union. This is one of not just a major trading partner of India. I mean, our trade with the European Union is more or less balanced in the last 10 years. It's not like RCEP countries where you have more than 100 billion trade deficit with those countries and all kind of problems. So I mean, but of course, I mean, many things have changed. We started from 2007. I mean, negotiations are frozen since 2013. And of course, and from the European side, this was also a very ambitious agenda. It's not just only about trade in goods, it's also services, procurement, investment, etc. Now, many more things have happened, and at the same time, still we do not know what is going to happen with Brexit. So all those uncertainties. But still, I think at least what Government of India can do now, if they're changing their trade policy, of course, things are not going to happen tomorrow, but at least we can restart negotiations, because it's not that Europeans, if they have put FTA slightly off the radar in all the declarations or in the rhetoric, it's not that they somehow don't put that thing on top of the agenda. Only thing they have realized that that's not happening in the last few years. So there's no point talking about something which you have no way of getting somewhere. So instead of later on all the questions asked, because anyway the major competencies or main competencies of the EU are actually in the trade, not really in other areas. So they're very much in the agenda. In fact, even if you look at last India-EU summit, the German ambassador was the one who actually was very disappointed that nothing has really happened as far as the FTA negotiations are concerned. So they are very keen, and the Europeans are very keen on this. But at the moment, yes, I mean, there are many more areas because, which we can still work till the time things are ready for FTA, and particularly with Germany. I mean, if you look at the whole Energiewende program in Germany, it's not just only about energy transition. This is about the whole transformation of the German economy.
Sure.
So they have investing so much into this, and with all kind of green technologies, all processes. So there are a lot of things which we really need to do. The kind of actually problem we have, from pollution to climate change to everything else, I think there are a lot of areas in which Germany can really help us in, particularly in those, renewable energies, and then they know that they can help. And in fact, they are very keen to even help India in this thing. And I think this has perhaps been one of the focus because what they have done is also tactically, they know that FTA is not working, so they are really focused more on the sustainable development, renewability, and where things can actually work on the ground for the next 1 or 2 years, till the time things are ready.
All right, time now to get closing comments from all my guests, starting first with you, Ambassador. What's the best way forward?
Clearly, we need to work with Germany and other middle powers to see what we can do to meet global challenges together. Whether we can shape some kind of a middle power consensus on many of the global issues. We also need to see how we can give more substance to the economic and technological cooperation between India and Germany. And here I would like to echo what my co-panelists have said, that if we are looking at FTAs, it makes logical sense to have an FTA with Europe where our trade has been reasonably balanced all these years, and which is our largest single export market if you take the EU together. Otherwise, as a single country, it's the US. Whereas with ASEAN and East Asia, on the other hand, we are the market and we have a deficit of over $100 billion.
Right.
So in a sense, the asymmetry between India and China in RCEP may pose economic challenges to you in a way in which I think you might find yourself in a great difficulty to cope with. Whereas with the European Union, it doesn't really, pose that kind of a challenge if you look at the actual trade figures and, the nature of trade between the two countries.
Sure.
Germany in particular has been one of the least protectionist countries in Europe as far as goods and trade in goods is concerned, because they vacated, actually, as an economy, they vacated the lower end of manufacturing and began to focus on more expensive, sophisticated manufacturing. So the competition, in a sense, is not there. We are not competing economies. Yes, they have been protectionist in terms of services.
Right.
So our IT, for instance, has found it very, very difficult to penetrate the German market as far as IT services are concerned.
Sure. Right.
But clearly, I would echo what they are saying.
Right, Ramit?
Yeah, I think what we're looking at is now a broader, I put it in a broader picture, a new European policy by India because of Brexit, because of China, because of America, and because of our own, should we say, larger global interests right now. And Germany is going to be one of the key pillars of that new policy. And we'll start to see that unfold, I think, over the next 3 or 4 years. Definitely in the briefings that the government has given us since Modi's been re-elected, they've made it clear that Europe is going to be one of their key focus areas.
Right. All right. And Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think Europe is looking at India very, very seriously. That's quite clear even if you look at their new strategy which came out last year. The only thing which we really need to do is we need to understand the way Europe function, where the competencies are, how things function, and then promise only those things which we can deliver.
Right.
Because Europeans work in a very, very different fashion because they say, group of 28 countries.
Yeah, it's very systematic there, so we need to keep that in mind. All right, on that note then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.